Well, reports are confirming that Nelson Piquet has been banned from the weekend's British Grand Prix at Eccleston after his racial description of Lewis Hamilton was made public. Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Witwatersrand. He's also Research Associate. Professor Southall joins me now. A very good afternoon. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika. Professor, you've studied whiteness in a South African context. This is in Brazil, but the kind of apology that followed that and that was offered by Piquet is one that we've often heard here in South Africa. But what's wrong with it?
Well, I think our use of language tells us a lot about the sort of society we are living in and the sort of society we want it to be. And where racial terminology is used loosely or provocatively, it often indicates a lack of respect for another group of people from what the spokesperson is. And I think the use of language is extremely important. We need to be careful in the way we talk, especially in societies, and actually most societies are racially or ethnically divided. We have a responsibility to use language with respect for other groups. Quite frankly, it is very common that one group may not necessarily like another. But if one wants to maintain a certain minimum of social solidarity and social courtesy, then it is very important to understand and to obey certain rules, just basically, at the very least, and this is the minimum, of politeness to other people. We do not use racially derogatory terminology, full stop.
Is it enough to say that these comments were taken out of context and one doesn't really understand the kind of social context in Brazil?
Well, you know, the problem with apologies is that they need to be put in context. And thank heavens yet we don't have thought police. So we can never be 100% sure whether apologies are genuine or whether they are put forward for convenience to get someone out of the hole they've dug for themselves. But generally we need to look at context, we need to look at who is making the apology, how powerful they are and what their background is. And usually we can have a good understanding of whether those apologies are heartfelt and genuinely meant. I don't know enough about racing to be able to talk about this particular incident, but I think it does tell us a lot perhaps about the sport in terms that it's a very elitist sport in terms of who can get into the top positions, because the amount of money involved and the lack of opportunities is very different from team sports such as soccer and so forth. So I think we need to look at context and we need to look at the venue in which these are made. Sociologists have a term, backstage talk, where there might be racialist talk around the braai, which I would regard as very undesirable, but it's very different from when you put it on Facebook and when you go on television or whatever. Context matters.
What about the latest comments that have come from the former CEO of the sport, Bernie Eccleston, what he had to say about Lewis Hamilton? And he should have just brushed aside the racist comments, and then also he would take a bullet for Vladimir Putin.
You know, it's all very well to say that people of colour should live with insulting language, and I think that only by pushing back can they make sure that they are not subjected to insulting behaviour or insulting attitudes. As I said in the beginning of this interview, social courtesy matters. It's a matter about basic respect for how we get on with each other. And to suggest that people of colour should be prepared to tolerate unacceptable language is itself unacceptable. And I think it reflects very badly on the sort of people who make that sort of suggestion. As for the Putin comments, well, I'm at a loss for words, quite frankly. Bizarre and unacceptable. The war in Ukraine, we may have our separate opinions about it. We may have our opinions about about the way NATO has behaved in the last few years. But when we see the damage being done to a country, the way towns and villages are being destroyed, the way in which hundreds of thousands of people are being maimed and being made homeless and killed, then I think really Bernie Eccleston needs to have a good, long, hard look at himself in the mirror.
Professor of Sociology at Wits University and a research associate. Thank you so much for chatting to us, Professor Roger Southall here on Newzroom Afrika. Thanks for your time. That